Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the College of the Environment Environmental Speaker Series. My name is Stephen Freeland. I'm the coordinator. As always, you can email me if you have questions from the Zoom or from the room, either one. As always, I'm going to ask you to put away those laptops and tablets and turn off your phones so you can have your undivided attention on our guest today. Paul Kearsley comes to us from a variety of colleges on campus, including College of Industrial Design, College of the Environment, Fairhaven College. What was the fourth one you were saying? You were
the design program.
Design program.
Graphic designing.
So clearly we've been using him well. A background in both environmental ed and industrial design, a designer and illustrator himself, as well as a teacher. And we're going to hear about how that all plays into permaculture and some other stuff. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Come over here. Cool, thanks. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I myself, I'm a graduate of the College of the Environment. Finished with the Master's in Environmental Ed a few years back. It was a pretty fun experience. I also did my undergrad here at Western in the College of Engineering and Design, studying industrial design. I was lucky while I was in school, they had just opened up the sustainable design minor, and that program really caught my eye. So after school, got really sucked into that rabbit hole. I spent the 2 years after graduation on an off-grid hippie homestead out on the San Juan Islands. I lived on an outdoor deck that was, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet for 9 months out of the year. Learned all sorts of stuff from what I like to call hot, cold, wet, dry. Those are very important lessons, as well as things like horticulture, agriculture, food systems, animal systems, carpentry, irrigation systems and plumbing, stone masonry, food processing and preservation, community decision-making processes, and all sorts of different things that kind of are, I guess, like the, where a lot of the sustainability stuff hits the road. So very much a generalist, right? Like to study a lot of different skill sets. Since then, have done a number of different little projects, one of which, I can click it. Let's see.
Should go. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, cool. Immediately after that internship or apprenticeship, some friends and I started an edible landscape design build. So we were working in Bellingham doing design and installation of gardens, orchards, compost systems, helping people figure out chickens and how to integrate them into their urban landscape. Ran this for a couple of years. It was a pretty fun project. Learned a lot about plants, rocks, dirt, trucks, and all that stuff. At the same time, run a small business called Terra Phoenix Design. We do integrated site and systems design for off-grid homesteads and eco-villages. So we help people figure out how to kind of start folding all of their systems into each other in order to get optimal performance. Have worked locally, have worked regionally, have worked internationally, Costa Rica, Peru, Greece, hopping around. And yeah, a lot of time people call us when they're sort of in a tricky situation. They don't know how to get water to their site. They don't know how to get food to their site or what they might be able to grow. And so our specialty is sort of integrating all these different systems. You can take water from a hand washing sink, run it out into the environment, and use it to grow blueberries, right? That's a phenomenal success. Anyone here like blueberries, right? And so as opposed to municipal wastewater systems where we'd be taking all the water from campus here, say, and sending it down to Fairhaven, a lot of that water can be used in landscape as something like irrigation for plants. And not only do they like the water, they don't mind the additional nutrients of something like a kitchen sink or a hand sink. That can get processed through soil microbes and then turned into soil and then consumed by the plants and turned into more fertility. Have also done a lot of work inside the Bellingham community. This is a work project with Whatcom Middle School. I've been very involved with the school gardens and all sorts of different community garden projects around the city. It's a really kind of fun space to work inside of. People most people like plants and like getting dirty and working with their hands. And so it's really cool to be able to facilitate that for a lot of folks. But not particularly focused on my work today. I want to talk to you guys as young humans on this planet, young humans in our culture who are sort of looking at the future, right? I think there are some big forces that are driving this future. And this is kind of a surreal talk for me to be giving because I went to a very similar conversation 15 years ago on Western's campus. No, not 15 years ago, 11 years ago on Western's campus, and heard very similar stuff. And in a sense, there's a little bit of Chicken Little going on where it's like, oh, the sky is falling. We all need to run. On the other hand, a lot of the things that we were talking about are starting to come to pass. And it's kind of like, oh, it's weird, right? And so I kind of want to articulate some of these different big concepts. And I think some of us have familiarity with some of them. It's not a lot of people that I meet that have a lot of familiarity with a lot of them. And so what we're talking about here are a couple of big, huge forces that are sort of shaping our world and will probably shape your world, shape your career, and shape big parts of your life. Beyond that, though, I want to start talking about your capacity and your agency in this world as someone who can affect that type of stuff, and how we can kind of raise a bit of awareness about these problems and their impact on our lives, and then we can start to mitigate the negative impacts and even optimize the positive impacts. I want to start with some problematic narratives. In the context of the environmental conversation that we've been having as a culture for the past 10 years or so, I think a few stories have risen to the top that aren't necessarily helpful. And I think these problematic narratives are getting a little bit too much attention. The first one being that we can stop climate change, right? A lot of the conversations that we can stop this thing, and in a weird way, it's kind of stopping us from actually acting. We still have an out. We can still hold on, and like someone's gonna swoop in at the end with like the 3-pointer at the buzzer. It's like, oh, cool, it's not a problem anymore, right? We've been talking about this for like 7 decades, right? In 2008, it was determined that 350 parts per million was a critical threshold for us to avoid runaway climate change. 350.org formed. There was a lot of great action. It was happening inside of our cities. Some of you may have seen it or participated in it. We're currently at 420 parts per million. Has anyone here been to 420.org? They're not reducing carbon emissions, right? We're at a 20% overshoot. This isn't supposed to be totally catastrophic, but like eye-opening. We need to kind of like get on top of this thing and start to understand how, like what type of change we need to really make. Another problematic narrative here is that we can just electric our way out of this, right? We can just summon Pikachu. He's going to show up and like charge the grid, and we got it. Electricity, this is a fascinating chart. This is from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. They do all sorts of research on energy resources, weapons, military stuff, transportation all over our country. They've got all sorts of cool resources. This is a chart for total energy consumption in the United States in the year of 2019. 2019 was convenient because we consumed 100 quadrillion BTUs. That's the quads. On the left side, we have the energy sources, petroleum, biomass, coal, natural gas, geothermal, wind, hydro, and solar. The bands coming out of each of those boxes represent the relative proportion of our energy consumption that those resources make up. In the middle, you'll notice we've got a little orange box up there, which is electricity generation. And you can see the things feeding into electricity generation are primarily natural gas, coal, and nuclear, right? And not only that, electricity is just a third of the energy we consume. And it's interesting because so much of the conversation about fighting climate change and our renewable future is just about how do we make clean electricity. And we're completely disregarding the 66% of the energy that we consume. which is petroleum, coal, and natural gas. Not only is electricity just 33%, but huge portions of our industrial metabolism are unelectrifiable, right? If they could have electrified it by now, they would have. We've been at this for a really long time, right? And so things like transportation, we'll notice that petroleum is like the only thing feeding into transportation. It's been like 10, 15 years of this whole solar electricity thing, and it's just like, a solar panel does not equal a jerry can full of diesel. They're very different creatures, right? Much more portable, much higher potential, longer term, slower distribution. Don't get me wrong, I love solar panels, right? I've lived off solar panels, but they are just not the same sort of thing. One other just interesting piece on this chart, if we look up in the top right corner, we have, what do they call it? Rejected energy. 67% of the energy resources that we mine, refine, and utilize, 67% of that potential is just lost as latent heat, farted away, right? It's like a crazy number. I think another problematic narrative is that our leadership is going to save us. Anyone see this film? I think this film was fantastic, right? Was not a feel-good hit. There were some really important lessons in here, especially coming from someone like Leonardo DiCaprio, who's been in this fight for a really long time. I think this film is often sort of regarded as like a way that we can make fun of climate deniers. It's like, oh, they're so stupid. When I think what really they're talking about is the incompetence and inability and avarice, just greed of our leadership system, right? Our leadership is not interested in fundamentally changing the system that gives them power. Period, right? They don't want to change the way we use and consume energy because it gives them power. And it's up to us to figure out how to do that if we want to sort of take the power back. Another problematic narrative is the notion that humans are the problem. This really misses the cultural implications of what's going on here. To write it off and just say all humans are the problem is disregarding hundreds of thousands of years of human development, disregarding millions of different cultures who lived in different lifeways on different landscapes in regenerative, healthy, humane processes, right? There's all sorts of books about this. Tending the Wild, Dark Emu, Braiding Sweetgrass, Sand Talk, right? Indigenous lifeways were place-based, efficient, humane, and like legitimate ways of living. But a lot of our culture has destroyed through genocide and oppression and all the different tools of empire, has destroyed that and then belittled it and said that, oh no, you know what, all humans have these problems. It's not just us, it's like everybody does it. And I think these problematic narratives are, taking up a little bit too much space. What I want to look at are some of the big paradigm shifts that we have coming down the pipe. And then we're going to look at solutions that start to match these problems. So these paradigm shifts, I guess what we're saying is that the world is always changing, right? Everything you touch, you change. Everything you change changes you. Anybody? The only lasting truth is change. Read Octavia Butler. Has anyone heard of the parable of the sower? Have you read it? Yeah. Hell of a book, right? And she was spot on, and she was about 20 years ago, and she was very much right on point, scarily so. Parable of the sower. It's fantastic. The world is always changing. These large forces are going to increasingly affect our daily lives. I think in a lot of ways we've been pampered and sort of buffeted from a lot of these impacts. And as the world continues to turn, some of those buffers and some of that cushion is going to be going away. For instance, energy. I think a really important concept to understand in terms of energy is energy return on energy invested. How much oil does it take to get oil out of the ground? Back in 1901, we got a Texas gusher here. You know, this is There Will Be Blood. You dig a deep enough hole in the right spot in Texas, and it's just like, pfft, there's just oil flying out, right? And you've made it, you're rich, right? You don't care if you're being covered in toxic slime. 2020, we're using all sorts of crazy technologies, shale mining, deep water stuff. And sure, we're getting access to more and more energy resources, but it takes a lot more energy to get them. It takes a lot more energy to rinse off the tar sands and extract the oil from them than it does to just poke a hole in the ground in the middle of Iraq, right? And so EROI, the energy return on energy invested, is moving down until it hits a critical point of 1, where it takes us 1 barrel of oil to extract 1 barrel of oil, right? And I think there's often a misconception that we're going to run out of oil someday. That's not going to happen. We're going to run out of cheap oil, right? I think this diagram is really fascinating. I found it on an article that was saying we're never going to run out of oil because we have fracking. The article is from 1999. But I think they're kind of proving their point, or they're proving my point, in that we've got a big fat jelly donut right here, and they're just drilling straight down into it, slurping out all the sugar. And on the other side, we have the tiramisu, and they're calling it more sophisticated horizontal penetration, which I read as more money, more technology, more moving parts, more stuff that breaks, harder to get at, higher cost, lower EROI. Another huge force is going to be these economics. As it costs more money to get more energy, the cost of energy increases. As the cost of energy increases, the cost of everything increases. There's nothing in this room that was not in a truck, on a plane, run through a pump, moved around the world in some manner or other, consuming some sort of energy. And so as energy prices increase, the cost of everything increases, and what we start to experience is inflation. However, there's a big difference between inflation and stagflation. Inflation is the cost of everything increases, including wages. Stagflation is the cost of everything increases, except for wages. You may hear these words flying around on the news these days, people trying to figure out how long is inflation going to be around? What does this mean? And I think there's a lot of different ways to write it off. We're writing it off as a function of the coronavirus. We're writing it off as Putin. We're writing it off as Biden, depending on your political affiliation. But I think a lot of those are obfuscating or disguising some of what's really happening here. We aren't able to get the cheap free energy that we used to get, right? The cost of energy is increasing in order to access it. And therefore, the cost of everything is increasing, right? This little chart is monetary supply. This is only partially related to the EROI thing. But if you look 2010, 2008, we had about $1 trillion US dollars in existence. Following 2008, that doubled and then doubled again. And if you look over here, this is 2020. We went from $4 trillion in existence, increased by about 40%. Now there's $6 trillion in existence. What does that do to the value of a dollar? So it's not necessarily associated with a discovery. It's not like we found a bunch more oil or gold or anything like that. We just made money. What is that going to do to our economy, right? So these are really big questions, and they seem a bit esoteric. It's like, how could we, in this particular context, multiple cameras, there's a camera tracking me right now. I'm wearing microphones. Everyone has a phone in their pocket. Everyone's wearing a microphone, right? How could we, in this context, experience diminished energy? And I think in this context, it's a little esoteric, but if we talk with anyone else in the world right now, their response to this conversation would be like, no shit. Have a look at this. Diesel crisis in Europe worsens as Austrian energy giant limits sales. Britain heading for worst fall in living standards since 1950s. Cuba struggles to buy fuel. French grid manager asks users to reduce consumption. Europe's energy crisis sends shockwaves through Germany's industrial heart. Fresh coal crisis looms in India, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, Kenya, Myanmar, Nepal, North Korea, Pakistan's oil sector seems slipping into a financial crisis. Peru sees fuel protests. Algeria warns of possible gas price increases for Spain. Sri Lanka currently plunges the world's worst performing economic meltdown on account of increased fuel prices. Sudan suffers from power cuts. Spanish truckers protest after increased fuel prices. US farmers switch from corn, a highly resource intensive product, to soy, a much more resilient sort of crop that doesn't take as much to grow because of a fertilizer crisis. We don't really understand that fertilizer is an energy source, right? We don't really understand agriculture very well in our culture. US truckers comment on diesel price. We're going to see a lot of bankruptcies. The trucker conversation is becoming a little bit more in the limelight. Canada has seen it happen. We've started to see it happen in the United States. We have an aging power grid. And lastly, Vietnam wants to import 5 million tons of coal from Australia among a vehicle shortage. This is all from the last 10 days. I had to go back 10 days to get the one from Germany because that was old news, right? It's all around us. This fuel thing is starting to take hold, and we're starting to have realizations of what this might be. It's a lot to process, right? I want to recognize the cortisol in this room. I want to recognize the heart rates, the stress, and the anxiety. I think this is a really important part of some of this transition stuff, is like honoring the grieving that kind of has to happen, honoring the emotional experience. I think it's really easy to get sucked into something like the technology of sustainability or this or that or the other, and like we're going to fight climate change and it's this thing. And I think it's really important to kind of recognize like, oh, this makes me sad. But we can ground ourselves. Let's all take a deep breath. How about one more? We're in good hands. And there's a bunch of awesome solutions, right? There's a bunch of solutions that aren't really going to do much, but there's a whole ton of work that needs to be done. And it turns out to be fun, tasty, invigorating, oftentimes funny. And we got to participate in that, right? That can be a part of your life. What I'm talking about are these transition strategies. The transition town movement started in England, I think around 2008, the town of Totnes. It was born out of permaculture, right? This whole conversation that I'm talking about is very much a permaculture kind of conversation. We're just not explicitly talking about permaculture for a couple of reasons. But the transition movement was looking at how we can use currently available energy resources to set ourselves up for life with less energy. And through these activities, the ones that move us toward a more resilient and less energy consumptive culture will implicitly reduce carbon emissions, therefore fighting climate change. It's a little tricky, but let's look at an electric car. We might reduce emissions with an electric vehicle, which is great for climate change, but we're still dependent upon that vehicle. Not only are we dependent upon that vehicle to navigate our city and work our daily life, that vehicle costs $56,000. Raise your hand if you have $56,000 sitting around. Right? And so who gets an electric car? Everybody? Nobody? How do we even acquire them? Right? So there's an economic problem here. Likewise, there's an energy problem. A car weighs 4,000 pounds. If I'm going to go to the store to get a light bulb, why am I hauling 4,000 pounds of metal with me? And when we're talking about energy return on energy invested or just general efficiencies, taking the car is like ridiculous. And yet we have such a fixation on electrification of automation of automobiles and transportation. If we consider all of those different factors, it's kind of solving the emissions problem, but it's really not addressing some of these economic issues. It's not necessarily an equitable solution. And it's not really addressing the energy issues, right? We're still wasting huge volumes of energy hauling around unnecessary metal. Where these three issues converge, there's a whole realm of work. And this is what the transition movement is looking at. How do we address the simultaneous situations in energy, economics, and the environmental situation? And in terms of transportation, a cargo bike weighs 40 pounds. I have a cargo bike, it's heavy, but it's great. I don't think about it until I get on a light bike and I start riding around. I'm like, whoa, I'm fast. Cargo bike costs about $400. You can probably do much better for less. Craigslisting. Love Craigslist. I think it's one of the best parts of the internet. And a cargo bike runs on eggs and potatoes, right? Only a small amount of mining necessary. That was opening a, yeah. So these transition strategies are trying to address all three of these things simultaneously. And what it kind of gets us into is the realm of the gritty green, right? It's not the sleek, clean green future where we're all riding around on hoverboards that Elon Musk gave us before he left to Mars, right? It's a little bit more gritty. Dirt on your hands, cuts and nicks, and physical labor, right? But this type of stuff is like true to its core. There are certain things that you just cannot fake, that you cannot commodify, right? That I think we all recognize and enjoy. And when we're doing it, it's like, oh, right. Sharing food with people, biking around in a big group, tons of fun. What we're doing out at our place, this is Queen Mountain Homestead. We're on 8 acres in North Bellingham. We're trying to set up a functional model of a lower energy lifestyle. It involves a lot of food production and not a lot of going anywhere. Spend sometimes weeks in the summer where it's just like, have I left the farm lately? Takes energy, right? And so we're doing all sorts of stuff from composting toilets to wood or lumber salvage and all sorts of things. But I want to just point out a few. We've got building topsoil actively. We're using pigs and ground up pallets. The pigs till the pallet chips into the ground. They poop in there. They miss different pieces of food, so we get compost in there. And then we come in behind them after they've left and inoculate it with mushrooms. The mushrooms run through, eat all the remaining lignin. And over the course of 3 or 4 years, we've built about 4 inches of topsoil. That was a lot of wheelbarrowing. Some people in this room have moved those wheelbarrows, right? But it's fun. It's work, but it's fun. Biodiversity. You know, biodiversity, topsoils, these things are often regarded as signs of failing ecosystems, right? We're losing topsoil, we're losing biodiversity. But it's funny because biodiversity is like this magic thing that only happens in Costa Rica. Anyone have an apple? You got an apple? We just doubled the biodiversity in this room. Think about it. We have a whole nother species with genetic material that we could propagate. Biodiversity is something that we can constantly interface with. When we landed our site, we had about 18 different species in an old hay field. And we have easily turned that into 80 different species, right? Many of them are productive. The ones that aren't productive are beautiful. The ones that aren't productive or beautiful are weeds. Likewise with amphibians, right? Amphibians are the harbinger of a failing ecosystem. which means that they're also a sign of a thriving ecosystem. So we're trying to build amphibian habitat at our place. This is a pond chain. It was an old drainage ditch that was cut to dry out a pasture from the old cattle operation that was in the area. And then it just kind of like shunted into the woods over by our place. And it had been like that for 60 years. And so we got into the woods and it wasn't like a functional wetland or anything like that. We just started cutting in ponds and playing beaver out here. This is actually a group of students. I think most of them have graduated. Tor's still here. Jake might be here. But started just playing beaver and building out different little pond areas. And then we wait for the rain to come and we watch them fill up. And then they drain down. They're ephemeral. They fill up in Thanksgiving. And then they're empty by Easter or so. But we're making amphibian habitat. And when you stand down here, the frog chorus is like invigorating. It's awesome. At another pond, we've seen 3 different types of salamander. It's like, cool. That's a good sign. These are all land-based strategies. And I understand that not everyone here owns land. I also want to recognize land ownership is a colonial construct. We're very grateful for the privilege to own land. We also want to recognize that that land was taken. That land was taken, right? And so it's not necessarily ours to own. How do we do the best that we can with it? But what does this look like at different scales? What does this look like at a city scale? This is the bodega bill. I like that name. This map is showing all the different locations where someone could buy bread, eggs, light bulbs, and tampons. Simple essentials, right? And the circles represent a half-mile walk, or rather a half mile in diameter. So it's a quarter-mile walk there and a quarter-mile walk back. And if we look at our city, there are huge chunks of the land where we cannot achieve or attain those basic amenities without a vehicle of some sort, right? The whole Birchwood food forest or Birchwood food desert issue is pretty real. You may be aware of that. All of Alabama Hill, everything up above Lincoln Creek and so on. I missed the little stop and go on the corner of Harris and 12th. Love that place. But this is what we could have. And this isn't a complex technology. This is a very simple zoning exemption. The city says, a request for proposals. Hey, we're trying to incentivize a more walkable city. We want homeowners who are interested in converting maybe a portion of their house into a small business. Think Nelson's Market, right? Anyone here go to Nelson's? Raise your hand if you've been to Nelson's. It's the best, right? It's just like right there. It's a little house thing. It's so cute. And they have what you need. A couple of beers, some chips, matches. Don't play with fire. Another one, perennial food production inside of our common spaces. I've been to a few food forests before, old ones, in the Peruvian Amazon and on the Greek islands. Walking around in the forest and it was just like chestnuts everywhere and walnuts, and that's a pomegranate, and that's a loquat, and that's a pear. It's just like, oh, there's just food here. Not to mention hundreds and hundreds of olive trees. Like there's just food around. It's like, who's caring for this land? No one, right? It's just doing its thing. We have so much green space in our city, and it's kind of this quasi-native, untended land. It would be very easy to establish a couple of simple perennial productive crops: walnuts, chestnuts, hazelnuts, right? This was a big part of the transition movement in England. They were Nuts About Nuts campaign, and they were trying to become the nut capital of England. And so they were just planting nut trees all throughout their city, all the green spaces, all the little nooks and crannies, with the notion that in 40 years, it's going to be nuts. This one's kind of a mashup of a few different ideas, but collective gardening. Not the community garden model where everyone has their own little autonomous plot, but collective gardening where small groups of people are collectively growing things like staple crops: potatoes, squash, beans. This is based off of a model that a friend of ours is running on Orcas Island called Orcas Community Participatory Agriculture, Caitlin Leck. And yeah, it's a phenomenal model. And they've been running it for 3 years very successfully, and they're starting to expand it to a few different sites. I think its biggest drawback is that it's rural, right? We could be doing this much, much more effectively inside of the city. And it's a great way for people to learn how to grow meaningful amounts of food, right? Because you're working together, there's a little bit of leadership and then instruction, and then they learn how to do these most functional crops, and then they can start providing more for themselves. The genetic repositories thing, just maintaining living libraries of important crops. That's all city scale stuff, which we may or may not get involved with. But what can you do on a personal level, right? How do you, as a young person in this world, starting your career, figuring stuff out, how do you start engaging with some of these ideas and preparing for some sort of future? I think there's a lot of different ways, and a bike is a good one. The money-saving joy machine between your legs, right? Bikes are amazing. Do we have any cyclists in here? Bikes are phenomenal. Bellingham is tricky because as a student, when you have a bike, everything's uphill, right? But when the summer comes around or when you graduate, the city is actually very flat. There's not much on the hill except for campus. And so biking from the north side to the south side, you can take the waterfront, ride on the trail. You can ride all over the city, and it's actually very flat. This is a 1990s mongoose that I got for $15 at a garage sale, right? And an extra cycle free radical kit on the back. This is hauled Weber grills, tools, ball and burlap trees, plants, other people, food. I can fit like, I think 100 pounds of apples on this thing, which seems like a lot of apples unless you have 5 pigs. That's like a day's worth of apples. And so it's something as simple as getting a bike. I know it doesn't necessarily equate to the magnitude of some of the problems that we've been talking about, but I've been biking in this town since 2003, right? That's just that few trips, that much less wear on our roads, that much less demand for oil, which is taking power from the systems that are using these energy resources to launch wars, right? When I'm pedaling around and it's piss and rain, middle of December, I'm like, I'm just on my bike. And then I just like think of, I don't know, think of something like that. Like I'm doing this for a reason. And yeah, it's grounding, right? Bikes are phenomenal. Such a great way to learn your city. Another really simple, really accessible skill, plant plants. It's really that easy, and it is amazing. Do we have any plant nerds in attendance? Good. Culturally, we're very alienated from plants. We just kind of think of them as the green things that are around. They come in different shapes. But for all of human history, we've been deeply, deeply integrated with plants. They make our clothes, they make our food, they make our medicine, they do all the things that we need. And it's really amazing to start participating in that relationship and to start engaging and learning. I think learning some native plants is great, right? Anyone here eat nettles? Just been eating pounds and pounds of nettles this spring. It's awesome. They're so yummy and they're free. Never had a barcode, never been shipped. They just come out of the ground and you cut them and they sting you and you're okay with it because you're going to win in the end. And lastly, learn practical skills. I think there's a lot of really awesome learning that happens in the context of a college, but I also think that there's culturally, we've been sort of undervaluing the trades. We've been undervaluing working with our hands. How many of you had a shop class? Good. Home ec, competent sewers in here, right? These are very useful skills. I can tell you that my mediocre plumbing skills have saved me thousands of dollars, have saved my neighbors thousands of dollars, right? Because I don't know if you've ever called a plumber before, but it's like $120 for them to show up. And their hourly is pretty much comparable, right? especially if it's an emergency. And so learning how things work around us, learning how to build stuff, learning how to fix stuff, take apart the sink, take apart the toilet, take pictures so you can put it back together. But like, learn how stuff works. Bikes are awesome. Learn how bikes work. Can you sufficiently maintain your bike, right? Oh, it's broken. I snapped a brake cable or I broke my chain or something like that. Go to the hub. They'll help you learn how to do this stuff. And then you don't need them anymore, right? It's kind of sad. I love the hub. I love Kyle. And I haven't had to go there because he taught me how to work on my bike. I was like, all right, I don't need the hub anymore. So skills, right? And learning really how to engage with our world. How do we build stuff? How do we make stuff? How do we grow stuff? And you can learn this stuff and it just makes you much more capable. It gives you such an awesome sense of agency and is an incredibly empowering experience to grow something and eat it. Or better yet, to grow something and share it with somebody else, right? That's the type of solution that I think we can be working for. And it's not this grandiose solution that a couple of people can do for thousands and thousands of dollars. It's a really simple solution that thousands of people can do for just a couple of bucks. There are all sorts of resources in town. Queen Mountain Homestead is us. Inspiration Farm, really awesome permaculture site. Salish Seed Guild, starting to try and cultivate genetic material that is appropriate to our climate. The Chuckanut Center down on Fairhaven. Anyone been to the Chuckanut Center? It's on the way, right when you're getting on Chuckanut Drive, it's to your left, and there's a whole community garden there. They do all sorts of classes and educational stuff. Common Threads Farm, Transition Whatcom, the Hub, and so on. In terms of books, highly recommend the Transition Towns book by Rob Hopkins. Highly recommend Parable of the Sower, and highly recommend anything by David Seymour, The Self-Sufficient Life and How to Live It. That's a really powerful book just in terms of how practical it is. Everything from how to like make cheese, how to kill a pig, how to propagate plants. And then in terms of film, Power of Community, Salt of the Earth, both really fantastic films that kind of outline some of these permaculture concepts, but like hitting the ground. You know, like, what does this actually look like? So yeah, all of this is a bit disconcerting, but I think at the same time, really inspirational. With some plants, with some wheelbarrows, with some hard work, some grit, we can have a ton of fun addressing these problems head on. It doesn't have to be something that the leadership is going to take care of. It doesn't have to be something that's like crippling us with anxiety. It's like, no, I do it every time I get on my bike. Do it every time I weed, right? And so I wanted to share this stuff with you guys today as a slightly older young person. And yeah, as you're moving into your careers and as you're moving into life outside of school, just wanted you to kind of have a similar message and see that there's a ton of potential here. It doesn't have to be everything you do, but it can certainly be part of what you're doing. That's all I got. Thanks for listening. And I think we can do questions. Yes.
So I really love all of what are your thoughts on the importance of individual versus overarching action of solving issues in climate change culture?
Yes, 100%. Has anyone here read the book Sapiens? Sapiens is a very interesting book, and I didn't love it. I did love it. I didn't love the end. But there was a really interesting piece there. It was a triangle talking about human relationships. And it had the individual, the empire, or sort of these larger institutions that are contingent upon abstract concepts in order to unite us together, right? Like, we're all at Western Washington University, but we really can't track the 14,000 people that are a part of that institution. The other piece of that triangle was human scale communities, right? And that human scale community is sort of like the max threshold of our psychological capacity to recognize faces. And it tops off somewhere around, I think, like 400 to 700 people. And I think that that is a really important working scale for affecting change, right? And it doesn't have to be 400 to 700 people. It can be 12 people. It can be 2 people, right? But I think a big problem that we have in our culture is that we have been atomized down to just an individual, and just an individual against just the empire. And we're kind of missing this collective scale where most of human experience has occurred. And I think that that's a really important place for us to work. And so I don't think that it has to be just an individual. I think that getting involved in the community is where you can start to see real change happening. Yeah.
Your thoughts on like people with disabilities in this process? Because personally, I have asthma, so looking at all this, I'm like, oh, that's the June, and then I'm like, can't ride the bike, can't really walk that far, can't garden.
Can't garden?
Well, I'm allergic to basically everything outside.
Okay, okay. I still think there's stuff that can be done. I think there's all kinds of different ways to contribute. And I think a really important skill is to look at what you like to do, what you can do, what type of work inspires you, and then find ways to engage. I've learned over the years of being sort of participating in this type of activism, the type of stuff that I'm not very good at, right? And those have been embarrassing lessons where, oh yeah, I'll do that. And it's like, no, I don't actually know how to, nor do I like to. And so I think that over the years have found like, oh no, this is a very particular way that I like to work, right? I love to sheet mulch. I also like to teach. Those are 2 very different tasks. And so learning about yourself and saying, what are the ones that I like to do? What are the ones that I'm capable of doing? What are the ones that I'm good at? And then finding ways to contribute. And so there's just tons, and I mean, there's so much work that we can be doing. There's no shortage of, yeah, I think there's plenty of different ways to plug in. Nice earrings, by the way. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's a question online, kind of similar. How can those with limited mobility, unable to bike or walk, make an impact in transportation emissions? And can you repeat the question?
How can those with limited mobility make an impact in transportation? I think that's a really awesome question, and I don't know the answer. And I think that it's another part of this work that we can do together. And I think it's, yeah, a really legit conversation to have. It's like, how do we include more people into these conversations and give more consideration to the full spectrum of the lived experience?
What are some of the major interactions that you see between projects that are similar to each other?
What do you mean major interactions? Or
like, I guess, what are the, I guess in the view of having a kind of a green community, reducing energy needs kind of reduces and scale the spaces that you go, that you see yourself inhabiting. So I'm just curious, you know, how you see these spaces, if the kind of scope of their place maybe not diminishes, but becomes more focused. How do you see them interacting with one another?
yeah, to repeat the question, how does, as we become more localized, how do localized groups and communities who are working on this type of stuff interact and connect with each other? Really good question. And the transition towns movement, which this whole transition kind of concept birthed out of, started off as a very local community doing their thing. And it was interesting because the community next door watched them doing this and was like, hey, we want to do that too, right? And they were doing really cool stuff in Totnes. They were doing things like setting up a farmer's market or additional farmer's markets where they had not been, establishing community parks with genetic repositories. They even coined their own currency in Totnes, which was circling around inside of Totnes and was good primarily for services. And so I could give it to you and you'd do something for me, and then you'd give it to someone else, and we could keep that capital inside of our community. But just the very notion of them sharing out that idea to other places have tried that and have had various degrees of success. But I think sharing the stories is just as important as like connecting and collaborating in a lot of ways. And there is this weird decentralization of it. It's not like we can point to one person and say, oh, this person is permaculture or this person is transition or anything like that, which we see in so many different cultural institutions. We want to like put the one person in front of it. That makes it really easy to knock that movement down. And so I think decentralizing is actually a really important part of this. And then those interactions kind of happen in an emergent and sort of natural way, right? Like transition Whatcom would obviously communicate with transition Skagit, and transition Bellingham communicates with transition Whatcom. These are small subgroups of this kind of thing. And then, you know, annual events where it's like, oh, we all come together for a convergence of the Northwest, and then we dissipate. And then this area is a good training space, and these people have interesting plant genetics, and we borrow things from them. And so interaction and relationship kind of happens in a really emergent way. Yes.
That, like, as that grows, how would you expect that like growing movement, like a cultural change, to butt up against like the capitalistic society that we unfortunately live in?
Yeah. How does this sort of growing movement of decentralization butt up against the continually growing movement of industrial capitalism? Good question. And I think it's kind of playing two slightly different games. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but starting to sort of disassociate and disengage from those systems, I think, limits the interaction and limits the butting up in a lot of ways. I think that another really important part of the transition notion, or of this whole transition concept, is that we're not going to do this overnight, right? That we all use the internet all the time, that I use fossil fuels 100%. I love chips, right? Chips are a byproduct of fossil fuels. I drive a car, we have a small truck. And I think a really important thing is understanding we're not decoupling from that system entirely. We're trying to set ourselves up so that we aren't as reliant upon it. We're trying to ease the transition away from this energy consumptive lifestyle. And then I think elements of disengaging, you know, if it's done really subtly and quietly, it doesn't ruffle feathers. Other movements, like I think in a lot of ways, the Zaptistas and the Black Panthers had a lot of this stuff embedded in their ideology, and they became very threatening to systems of power and were subsequently neutralized through violence. Don't want that to happen. And so then it's like, how does this sort of happen a little bit more organically and less? I think you can waste a lot of energy shaking your fist at a system that doesn't give a shit about you, versus like, how do we collectively grow our little community and not worry as much about butting up against these big systems?
Getting like permits, or I mean, I don't know the process, but how does it like work getting land that's like you're saying has plants and stuff? You have to go through to be able to put in those spaces.
Yes and no. You raise the concept of guerrilla gardening. Guerrilla gardening is a fantastic concept. And that would look like putting plants in places where people just might not notice, right? That's one end of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum is partnering with the city. And the city actually, through the Greenways Committee, the most recent Greenways levy, earmarked a big chunk of their mission to be promoting food resilience and food security in Bellingham through the Greenways in some way or other. So the Greenways is a property tax which raises a bunch of money that the city then uses to buy bike paths, parks, and other sort of green spaces in and around the city. It's a fantastic program made by a College of the Environment graduate. But the other side of the spectrum from the guerrilla gardening is engaging with the parks and going to a Greenways Committee meeting. They're public. It's tonight at 7. You can get a web link, right? And listening to what they say and starting to figure out how do we participate, because I've been doing this now for a little while, and what you'll find out is it's just people. It's just people who are like volunteering for stuff and doing things, and we can integrate and interface with them. So in terms of getting access to land, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, or accessing rather that public commons kind of space. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Some of them legal, some of them procedural, some of them less legal. But there's a whole spectrum of ways to start interfacing with that. And again, I think it would come back to this question of like, how do you want to engage with it in the best way possible? Is that a
We're
time
out of
check?
time. You can probably continue informally.
Sure.
Go. And next week, our guest is Jennifer Mackey from the Walkup Land Trust, a very related topic. So we'll ask them the same questions there. Thank you.
Thank you.